We're live on Radio Row at Circa Sports. We are excited. It's ultimate sign-up weekend for the Circa Survivor Contest and Circa Millions, all coming up here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Contest. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Jeff Erickson here. Joe Bartel there. We are talking. See my hand? I can point all the way through there for streaming live with us there. We are here at Circa Radio Row. We are excited. We're talking Circa Survivor. We're talking Circa Millions. And right now we're talking wide receivers. We're going through our tiers. We're talking strategy. We're covering it all. We're brought to you by the folks from Circa. We're brought to you by Fantrax as well. And, of course, from Fantasy Sports Knockout as well. Joe Bartel. Wide receivers. Let's talk wide receivers. Let's talk about what we do about, general strategy. Are you going after that? If you got an early pick, are you going running back anchor at the big three, or are you going to go on one of the elite receivers if you got a top 5 pick?
You've done this a long time, Jeff. So I want to be careful. No, I wasn't being that way. I was just saying I don't want to be hyperbolic when I'm saying that. This feels really difficult from a 1 through 5 perspective, from an 8 through 12 perspective. If you have pick 12, I think the strategies are different. Within your pick in the first round, it's not so much, hey, I'm going to take X receiver or X running back. It's what am I going to do in the middle of the second round? What's going to be likely available? What's going to be likely available at the back end of the second round if you have an early first round pick? And that I have found when I've been doing the best balls or even the many redrafts at this point has been more of a decider than do I like Jefferson over St. Brown, or do I like Tyreek Hill over Jamar Chase? Like that's a part of the conversation that I haven't really grappled with. And now with the news on, or I guess lack their news of CeeDee Lamb's contract holdout, your boy Jamar Chase's contract holdout, Tyreek Hill is wearing a brace, Christian McCaffrey has already got a hamstring injury. We're talking about 4 of the top 5 picks universally over the first month and a half that all have question marks. So I think that's the bigger part of this strategic wise. What do you want to have in the second round and that third round turn from where you're picking the first? Not so much I like X receiver over the other.
Right. I think that's actually I think that's not just a really good consideration. It's vital. You need to be planning ahead. When you know your draft pick ahead of time, map out. Now, all plans are great until you get, as Mike Tyson used to say, all plans are great until you punch in the mouth.
Yeah.
And the drafts will give you different things. If you're sitting there at 7 and Bijan's there, well, okay, I'm taking Bijan and I have to go to part B. That's why you should map that out. Know it ahead of time. So, okay, if I go this way, what's my pivot? What am I going to do? You may have been all set on taking Devon Achane, who I know you're big on there in the second round.
Big fading, yes.
Who knows? Maybe someone will pluck them from your loving arms, or maybe someone's just giving you that receiver that you want instead. You got to be nimble enough to take it.
It really is a matter of obviously knowing your board, and we talked about this last Tuesday or whatever it was for SiriusXM. But knowing your league's ADP setting, whatever you're drafting on ESPN, Yahoo, My Fantasy League. I went over it before. Now you look at the data. We have a great tool on RotoWire, the ADP report, where you can literally see the massive difference between different platforms on these players. I've never been a guy that's going to go on ESPN a mock draft. It's just not been super relevant to me. I think too often the AI or people who are playing are doing oddball things because they can do oddball things with no ramifications. It might be imperative to do a mock draft on whatever platform you're drafting to have an idea of what that ADP is, because it's different. And you and I are going to give analysis on these fantasy receivers and especially tiers, a tier group of receivers that you like out of that, whatever. I think it's really important to contextualize that it could be different depending on what draft league you're or what setting you have or what platform you're drafting on. I think that's incredibly important right now. And it's one of the reasons, again, you can like one of the receivers, Jefferson, St. Brown, Jamar Chase, over the other. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but it's more important to me what you're doing in the second round and third round, because that's going to alter things. And I think specifically, if you're taking a receiver early, does that mean that you have to have at least one running back in the next 2 rounds? Do you just go receiver all the way and then hope, especially in a not sharp draft, you can get a lot of these starting running backs later on? I think that can really deviate depending on the platform that you're drafting on.
Yeah, 100% it does. And, it's absolutely vital. Like if you're 3 receivers in a flex, it's PPR. Well, that's one thing. It's if you're on Yahoo and it's 2 receivers, 2 flexes, or 2 receivers, 1 flex, even I play in leagues like that. You got to, adjust accordingly. Getting that bell cow back is that so much more important when you do that. So absolutely true. So I like getting 1 running back out of the first 4 rounds usually.
Yep.
I'm not opposed to going 0 running back. It's not my favorite. I prefer anchor, but rarely am I going running back robust. I'm almost always getting just 1 running back in the first 3 rounds, 4 rounds. I know it can be viable to go 1 and 3, get your precious Josh Jacobs. Now I'm not being facetious. He actually does like Josh.
I do.
Guys, if you're streaming with us, Joe does not like Devon Achane. Just want to, if you're new to us, that was a little joke. We make jokes sometimes.
Well, I'll keep talking through it while Jeff's figuring out some technical difficulties. You're right. And if you were not aware of my Devon Achane love, lack thereof, which has been prevalent for the last 3.5 months at this point, we did actually do a podcast live yesterday, Nick and I, which is either on the RotoWire YouTube channel or out there in the social media network as well, too, where we went over all those running back tiers. And it's one of those things where you can have differentials on those running backs. But we're talking receivers. And I think, again, specifically, you can say that you like Jamar Chase. You can say you like CeeDee Lamb. You can like Justin Jefferson. I'm not debating that merit. I want to know what your plan is. If you are using this as advice for your drafts, what your plan will be in the next 24 or 36 picks. And Jeff had mentioned, and I totally agree, within the first 4 rounds, I want to have at least 1 running back. The worst build that I've had thus far, and it was a competitive league, was the Beat Joe Bartel Online Championship with the NFFC, where I had Joe Mixon as my running back 1 in the 4th round. It was late 4th round. Of the other guys available, James Cook was taken at that point. We already had, I think Alvin Kamara might have been gone as well too. You're kind of slim pickings, and I don't want to be forced in that spot. So you can like receivers, as many do, and I think of the underdog best balls that I've done a million times over, where it's like the first 7 picks are receiver. Just be mindful that you're not painting yourself into a corner with a lack of running backs or guys that you're not as confident in doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think my mic is coming a little bit better now if people that were throwing that out there. But yes, I think there's a lot of things that we need to be paying really close attention to there. And pardon my flustering there for making sure that our mic was right there. Live podcasting, boys and girls, good times. And set this up in my sleep, he says. Yeah,
that was a classic Jinx, right?
The universe always gets you. The universe always gets you. All right, let's talk about the first tier. If you're drafting that wide receiver in the first round, we have a lot of chaos this year.
Oh, yeah.
We got CeeDee Lamb holding out. We've got Jamar Chase holding in. We got Brandon Ayuk holding out, demanding a trade. He's in the second tier. But that alone, we got Justin Jefferson with quarterback uncertainty with Sam Darnold a little bit there. And, that has moved markets a little bit there. The 2 quote-unquote sure things that we have are Tyreek Hill and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Are you moving those 2 ahead of the other 3?
Yeah, and St. Brown, again, wearing a brace in his hand for the past 3 days.
Yeah.
He's been catching passes, but for somebody that was kind of banged up towards the end of last season, had his fantasy points capped, I felt like, relative to what we were getting in the early portions of 2023. That's noteworthy. It absolutely is. The more banged up in Tyreek Hill, is an old guy relative to the other receivers we just mentioned, but he's not that old, so you wouldn't think that's going to matter. It just complicates things. I have been pressed on this. We had the RotoWire Invitational that started up, at this point now, a week and a half in ours. It's been very slow. And I know Nick Whalen ended up taking Breece Hall, number 3 overall. I had picked 5, and CeeDee Lamb had fallen to that point, and I took CeeDee Lamb. And I would take CeeDee Lamb, I think, number 2 overall. The way I'm operating those first 5 picks, I'm trying to not let the outside noise distract what was cut and paste, locked in stone for the first 2 months of draft season, or even in that post NFL draft into the June range. It was Christian McCaffrey, it was CeeDee Lamb, and then pick your choice at receiver 3 that you liked. That shouldn't change. I assume CeeDee Lamb is going to play. I assume Christian McCaffrey is going to get hurt. We have no information to indicate either one of those is not going to happen. I would sooner assume Jamar Chase doesn't play the way the Bengals have been reacting with T. Higgins and just the overall front office malfeasance, I think, at times. Although I am nervous that Jerry Jones continues to put his foot in his mouth with comments. So I'm still taking CeeDee Lamb. I actually have Jefferson as my number 2 of this group over Tyreek Hill, over Amon-Ra St. Brown, over Jamar Chase. Because I actually think the Sam Darnold news that he will be effectively the starter all year is good news. I was a little bit worried that J.J. McCarthy was going to cap Jefferson a little bit as somebody I wasn't really confident in as a prospect. Sam Darnold will be okay. I think he'll be as the level of Josh Dobbs-esque player, which might not win them football games, but he will be able to throw a football to the best receiver in the planet, who is Justin Jefferson. So he's my number 2 of that group.
So I'm buying the dip on Chase. I think he will play. I think he will be there week 1. He was on the sidelines last night for the Bengals Colts preseason game, high-fiving his teammates, smiling. Does that strike you as a guy that's going to put the season at risk? It does not for me. I don't know if a deal gets done. I think he might just be okay, I'm not going to expose myself to injury in a preseason game if I don't get that contract. I doubt he's not out there when the Bengals suit up against the Pats. And I know he wants to be there in week 2 in Camaro Head, as I like to call it, Arrowhead there for the Chiefs game. That is a big rivalry now, for at least in the Bengals' mind. Probably not in the Chiefs' mind as much, but trust me, there's some dislike on the Chiefs' side too.
We had this scenario actually occur last year, and it wasn't with an offensive player, but remember, Chris Jones didn't play week 1 for the Chiefs. It's entirely possible that one of these star players, again, probably not offensive players, but star players, holds out. The team looks bad, like the Chiefs did in that loss, thanks to Kadarius Toney to the Lions. And then they signed Chris Jones. And it wasn't really a deal that made Chris Jones look great in hindsight.
Right.
But there's just enough of a win. And I think you as a competitor, as a player, don't want to see your team lose. I mean, these are guys that you're working with every day, your coworkers, that you want to be successful. I think that matters to something. So maybe the worst case scenario in my mind, whether it be CeeDee Lamb or Jamar Chase, they don't play week 1. But I'll be stunned if we're saying September 14th, if any one of these guys who are at all worried about are going to have any issues. If
one of the I agree. One of the holdouts, any of them, there'll be someone that holds out. I don't think it'll be Chase. I could be wrong, but that's just the way I'm leaning on that one there. I think it's more likely that be maybe Trent Williams that sits out a game.
Yeah,
I think that's probably a more likely scenario. Hassan Reddick is actually the best bet to miss a game. I mean, the dude hasn't even shown up for one practice. I don't think he's been in the locker room since the trade. He was never a member of this team. There is no
no camaraderie, loyalty, exactly.
There's no appeal to we're soldiers together or anything like that, because he's never even stepped foot in the locker room, ever. So I think that's I'm not a handicapper, but if I were, and I would set the odds at Reddick being the most likely to miss a game. I bet you there's a market out there somewhere that
I'm sure,
but I don't care to bet on that either. But anyways, going a little far afield here. So let's I'm going to get, more often than not, I'm going to get one of those top 5 receivers. It's just, there are leagues where I go Hall and then I just go receiver,
which you can do. Yeah. Yep.
And, or a pass or a tight end in there too. I don't mind going that route also, but I will fill up my pass catching slots early. One of the reasons for that is I don't like trying to time the market and trying to set, which receiver. I want to have 3-4 guys I can just say, you're in every week. That's, yourself too. Some people are good at the, wide receiver, cornerback matchups and timing the market and getting it right. And there's information out there. We have it. I don't always think it's reliable. Not ours necessarily. I'm just saying, generally speaking, because teams adjust. We say, this team can't stop tight ends. Well, guess what? They make adjustments. And then, in season, week to week, they make adjustments on that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
I agree.
But I think that's
it's going backwards on my I feel like the receivers after round 10, I don't really feel comfortable with this at all. Like it's just like, okay, so I'll make a Khalil Shakir work as my wide receiver 4, or Christian Watson, who maybe has upside. That doesn't feel great. There are so many of the receivers, even round 9, like you could throw in the Brian Thompson, that McConkey, and Coleman's in the world. If any of those have to be in your starting lineup, that's the worst lineup build that I've had doing a redraft league. So to your point, I'm taking the receivers early so I don't have to have that ambiguity later on trying to figure out a flex or trying to figure out something else. I want to have one of those, like a trio of capable starters to avoid that tier. And it's different because at running back, I'll buy in on Blake Corum. I'll buy in on Ezekiel Elliott. I don't mind getting a Jalen Wright or a Ray Davis with the speculation idea that they're going to be more involved. You can't find many of those guys at receiver. The one that I seem to gravitate towards a lot is Rashad Bateman, and he's a last-round pick. I might toss in your boy, Jermaine Burton, who did catch a touchdown pass last night as well. He's looked good in the preseason, but by all accounts, it's that other guy whose name I always end up saying incorrectly. Thank you. Yes. I knew Jeff was going to get it. I was just going to tee you up for it.
Thank you.
Those are like the only two that I'm ever going after late rounds, and that's exactly why I'm with you. In my roster builds, it's receiver heavy early. Yeah,
I'm with you 100% on that. All right, we're going to talk about the next tier, but first, quick note from our friends here, our hosts here at Circa. The biggest pro football contests are in Vegas, are back, and they're back. And Circa Survivor, Circa Million are now up to 16 million, Joe, in guaranteed prizes. 2 ways to win and no rake. Circa Survivor contestants select one team each week with no point spread. Last the longest, win it all. $10 million guaranteed. In Circa Million, make 5 picks against the spread each week for your share of $6 million guaranteed. Quarterly and full season payouts. Enter Nevada, play from anywhere. Visit circasports.com for details. All right, we talked mostly about the first tier here so far. Let's move on to the second tier. And, you're talking about, when I do it, we're talking ADP. I always go to the NFFC, but we have a page on RotoWire, rotowire.com/football/ADP. Just go to our draft kit page, go to the ADP tab, and you'll see we have copious ADP, and it's wild to see the variances there. We spent a whole hour of our show on Sirius XM talking about that. We won't do that. We won't rehash that again. But just, hey, check out that. Go to RotoWire, and while you're at it, check out RotoWire. RotoWire.com/try. If you're enjoying this, please check out the site. Check out our ADP function there, and you can just see the wild swings when it comes to these wide receivers. And you can see, like, they're all over the place. So RotoWire.com/try for that. Joe, tier 2. It starts basically, I think it starts with AJ Brown.
Okay, that's fair.
I think there's a big 8. Jefferson and Monroe are in that. And then there's tier 2, which is pick number 9. It's one pick later, but that's for me in my head, that's where the tier is. So you talk AJ Brown, you talk Marvin Harrison Jr. in there. You talk about a couple, you definitely have.
Is Garrett Wilson in that tier? Or is he outside of it?
Garrett Wilson's ahead of that, at least in terms of ranking. Puka Nacua is there. I think you can go all the way down to Drake London, I think, is in that tier as well. So that's wide receivers 6 through 10 in the last 10 days in the NFFC. That's my standard, my gold standard.
That's fair. So I guess the way I would do this is CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Jefferson, St. Brown. Those are in some order their own tier. And then I'm making a mini tier with AJ Brown and Garrett Wilson. Like those guys, if you have picked 9 or 10, you're debating between those two, maybe Jonathan Taylor, maybe Jahmyr Gibbs if you're feeling a little bit frisky with that hamstring injury. But it's those two, which is why it's the mini tier. And then after that,
I'd like to call him mini tier.
And then
after that reference, right?
Yes.
Nick Whalen would not.
Well, Nick has to watch more movies. That's what you keep telling him to do every time he's going off to. Yes, we're telling you to watch movies, Nick. That's what it is. It's okay. That's the mini
just
tier.
There, taking strays, doing nothing, minding his own business.
Those guys, Puka Nacua, Marvin Harrison, Drake London, is the intriguing tier of that group. And I think even if you want to expand further, Devontae Adams or Chris Olave, who are probably a little bit lower on that totem pole, at least NFFC ADP. I understand. I mean, this is table talk, but we all landed after we got here Wednesday, had dinner. It was very organic fantasy conversation. You would think we would be tired of talking about that when we do it all day for our jobs, but that was like an hour-long conversation eating hamburgers. And one of the things that Alan Slazowski pointed out, and I agree with him, aren't you a little bit worried about drafting Marvin Harrison as early as you are? I mean, this is, again, by far the highest ADP among any rookie receiver ever that we're doing with Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors. And I understand where he's coming from. I would love to get Marvin Harrison in the 5th round to be protected in the instance that he doesn't do good. But I think he is about a can't-miss prospect as a receiver that we've seen in some time. And in today's NFL, with Kyler Murray in an offensive scheme that looks pretty good, I will take the risk that Marvin Harrison at pick 16 makes total sense to me. I would rather have Drake London. So if I'm ranking that tier, it's Drake London, then Marvin Harrison. But especially with the way that Puka Nacua gets injured, it seems like often, I think Nacua is falling down further in my tier rankings.
Yeah, and Marvin Harrison is going ahead of Nacua, ahead of London now in the NFFC. And I see him frequently going at pick 11, first round. I know that's like no way, no how for you.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think it's for a lot of our crew. Alan Soslowski is apoplectic hearing that. Alan's not even in the room and he's taking strays now, but that's okay. I won't take him that early, I don't think, but I haven't been put to that test either.
You've been fortunate.
I have not been drafting on the wheel. My priority is to get in the middle of the round. If I'm setting my my KDS, my first choice is 8. I think I go 8, 7, 6, 5, pretty much. And then
that'd be for me too. I think most people would prefer that because you're getting the end of that receiver tier or Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. I agree. I just have infinitely worse luck than you, Jeff. So I have often had to pick at 9, right? One pick after that tier, or 12, which is that's the graveyard pick for sure. Like if you get 12, not that your season's done, but I feel significantly less confident making a roster bill to compete with Olave and Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson. Like
Life has a funny way of working out, though. There are times that Taylor Barkley could work. Baseball, it's Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge are at the end of the first round, and they're crushing souls right now. It's amazing. So it can happen. Do you elevate Adams or Olave or anybody else above the end of this tier?
No. So we did the Stake League auction draft. I know you and Liz talked about it on a podcast a week ago. I did an article up on the site as well. We talked about on SiriusXM. Olave went for $31 to list, which I thought was a really good deal. Actually, one of the better deals outside of his Stephon Diggs at 23. So that more or less set the price for that second round receiver group, at least for that draft. Again, Devontae Adams went for 31. I got Drake London for 34. That was more or less appropriate. I think for cost, like if we're saying redraft wise, Olave typically goes ahead of Devontae Adams. I'm okay with it. I think Gardner Minshew is going to be like the 27th best quarterback in the league, which is to say not very good.
Right.
But even in today's day and age, the 27th best quarterback can get it to a surefire Hall of Fame receiver like Devontae Adams is, in my mind. And you're going to get 100 plus. I think he's going to get 100 plus receptions. Now, is it like 1,100 yards with that? Is it going to be kind of like the Malik Neighbors aspect where I think Neighbors could be dynamic? He's going to get focused on a lot offensively, but he's the only guy in town. And I think that's a detriment to him in his year one. That makes me nervous. But Devontae Adams is like a safety net. So I think both those guys are outside that Nakua, Marvin Harrison, Drake London tier at the back end of the first round. Yep. But I'm okay. I'm okay saying Devontae Adams will have a middle second over some of the other guys that are after that group.
I have other receivers going ahead of not just of both those, but also ahead of Harrison, believe it or not.
Ahead of Harrison too. Okay.
Yeah. So I have Puka at 13 overall. I have Mike Evans at 14 overall. I have Nico Collins at 15 overall, then Drake London, then Marvin Harrison.
Can we pause on the Nico one? Because I think that's a really, really interesting. I'm not even saying you're wrong with it, but when there are three guys like Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell, we can throw Joe Mixon and Dalton Schultz into the mix. Isn't that a little bit worrisome when it's going to be essentially just Devontae Adams, maybe Brock Bowers? I mean, they might pass 15 times less a game than the Texans will. But if it's Devontae Adams getting 75% of that, which isn't quite the number, but it could be, that's where I think you're protecting yourself. Even if Nico goes insane, there's just so many people to feed in Houston.
I get it. But I'd rather have the first read on a great offense. I think a great offense and a good quarterback in a crowded room than an aging wide receiver on a really bad quarterback. I think Minshew, Minshew will have his shootout games, but he'll have some horrible games too.
He will. You're right. I think 2 years ago, it was Deshaun Watson with that suspension year, and we had Jacoby Brissett starting about 10 games, and Amari Cooper was the clear only show in town for Cleveland, was the main guy, and was like a 5th-round pick. If you could tell me Devontae Adams would be like a 4th-round pick in this scenario, that would be great. But that's just not the way the receiver market is. Like you're having to kind of make gut calls on these players, no matter what you like. And the case of Nico, and I think Mike Evans is another one of those gut calls that probably isn't wrong. We just saw it last year. I get a little bit worried that the offensive coordinator change is going to matter and that Baker might turn into more of a pumpkin this year with defenses kind of knowing what they want to do. But if Chris Godwin is involved in the slot, like what is supposed to be projected, well, that's protecting Mike Evans, too, to be a touchdown hog and a deep ball specialist, which he excelled at last year in worse circumstances.
Can you tell me the last time Mike Evans didn't have 1,000 receiving yards?
He's never had
Never.
It. Yep.
Never is the answer. And yes, the bell strikes for everyone at some point in time. He's younger than Diggs. He's younger than Adams. I think he gets another year. I think I think the whole Baker year on, year off thing. Okay, it's numerology. It's not analysis.
Right. And
you could say, okay, he signed his contract, so therefore he might be less motivated. You could say that. Maybe the new offensive coordinator. I think that's
the one that matters to me. Yeah.
Analysis being gone. Yes, I'll buy that as an option. But okay, so he doesn't get 13 touchdowns. He gets 1,100 and he gets 8. You got a floor there that is
you're absolutely right. But let's turn it around. Isn't that sort of the floor with Marvin Harrison, who is one of the more can't miss prospects?
No, it's not the floor.
Oh, see, I think that's
I think the ceiling, you can't say that about any rookie that's the floor.
That's fair. Okay.
You can't say floor. And the floor is lava.
Because he's never done it before, right? Well, that's what we're doing. Okay. That's fair.
I think he's going to be great. And I'm getting him 2 picks after Mike Evans. I'm still taking him in the second round in places.
Right.
There are people that are going to push running backs. There's people that are going to push Devontae Adams ahead of him, and that's fine.
Right.
I might not be on Adams, but I don't think it's a terrible pick. I'm not taking him there, but I am, and that's okay. But that's the beauty of fantasy football, and that's why we love it. That's why we love what we do. You're in love with another tier. We're going to talk about the another tier here in another second. But first, quick note from our good friends at Fantrax. Is there something you wish your fantasy league had, or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules, or playoffs? Playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further, because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Fantrax even offers college fantasy football leagues. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league, invite your friends, and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy football platform in the industry. Coming from another service? Not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax Commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Fantrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire today to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular NFL season game for you and your entire league. Plus, $6,000 in spending cash. That's right. Tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. Thank you for your patience. That was the Blue Wire Network ads as well. We always appreciate being on the Blue Wire Network. We have to park our podcast somewhere there, so we're thankful for them too. Okay, Joe Bartel is falling in love. Don't worry, he's got a kid, he's married, he's happily married, but he's falling in love with wide receivers. Come on, people. You like this range: Malik Neighbors, Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman.
I do.
We could throw in Diggs and Waddle and DJ Moore because we didn't really talk about those guys as well.
Yeah, so we were just debating the merits of Devontae Adams and Mike Evans and Marvin Harrison, who I think for top 16 overall picks have pretty significant warts, or at least definable, traceable warts. And it's almost to the point where I'll take a Jonathan Taylor or a Saquon Barkley mid second round or early second round, because I'm less concerned about what that workload is, even if it makes my roster a little bit more unorthodox or uncomfortable, especially if you took a Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson. It's the one scenario where you're saying, I don't want to take 2 running backs, maybe in an ESPN league where I know I can get this tier of receiver. But even elsewhere, you look at the NFFC ADP, Cooper Kupp is now more like a early third-round pick. He was even later at early portions of.
Yeah, you're starting to see him go in the second a little bit after the Puka injury.
And there's been optimism. There's been camp optimism saying, oh, yeah, that's right. When Cooper Kupp is healthy, he's clearly the favorite target for Matthew Stafford, and the chemistry they have is insane. It's undeniable that when Cooper Kupp is healthy, he is going to be one of the top fantasy options, and that's the discount you're getting in the third round. The issue is, I think you're getting that with DJ Moore. With a more electric offense, theoretically, with all the weapons they have, I think Caleb Williams raises the floor of that offense. Shane Waldron maybe makes me a little bit concerned that there's a temper of that, but I think the floor, again, is what we talked about with Mike Evans. 85 catches, 80 catches, and 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. But the realistic possibility is what we saw last year, 1,300 yards, 7 or 8 touchdowns in that same range, and still getting plenty of catches. Cooper Kupp, DJ Moore, Malik Neighbors, I understand why people are optimistic for, although he's lower on this group for me. I think there's just a litany of those guys. And you could throw Nico in there on certain platforms too, which is kind of like the biggest layup if he's the faller of that group. The early third round receiver tier is probably my favorite spot. If I could just get 2 or 3 picks in the third round, my team would feel way better than if I had one in the second round or whatever else. Like, I think that group is awesome.
Yeah. I see it. I see it a lot. I like those guys being my wide receiver 3 even better, but that's also me. But then, it depends, because I'll tell you what, there's enough people that are drafting wide receivers early that I feel compelled to kind of push those guys a little bit. And I still might get your precious Josh Jacobs at the beginning of the 4th round. Joe Mixon at the end of the 4th round. Isaiah Pacheco, I got in a draft in the middle of the third round.
Mhm.
These guys, hey, it's a zero-sum game. If these wide receivers are getting pushed up, that means I'm going to get a running back earlier. Now, no one's drafting quarterbacks really, unless you're in a super flex league. I have not been in more than one or two leagues so far, one or two drafts, if you will, where I've seen Josh Allen go before the third round.
But that's expert drafts, though. Most of these are expert drafts are doing, and we've just over the history of our time, for whatever the reason, decided we're going to wait on quarterbacks because we could do that as experts. It happens with the tight end position, happens with the quarterback position. I agree with you. I've been in a lot of those, but I looked at like Alan Sosowski's RotoWire Online Championship for my owner last week. Josh Allen was maybe pick 24. He was an early
second 2-3 turn. Yeah,
right. But it's right what you're saying. It's close to it. But I think the idea, and we're doing this for the audience who I would assume loves fantasy football, wants to beat their people, whoever's in the league, but probably is in the lower stakes ones. You're just going to go off of the ADP, which is where the quarterbacks sometimes go. ESPN's really heavy, high in those quarterbacks early. It's one of those scenarios. I will be waiting, especially for that upper tier of quarterbacks. I don't want to take them, but it's why I like what you had mentioned earlier, the Pacheco, Josh Jacobs range. If you really like those guys, if you were like me and stupidly flag planting on Josh Jacobs and taking him 10 picks before his ADP, it's okay because you're going to get a Cooper Kupp. You're going to get Malik Neighbors to a lesser extent, maybe even a DJ Moore falls because people are worried about what he looks like in HBO. And therefore, you're getting a wide receiver 2. That's why you said that's great if they're wide receiver 3s. I will be totally fine roster build wise if those are my wide receiver 2s.
Okay, fair enough. In the year of our Lord, though, how many people are drafting by ADP? It's just I think
there's 330 million people doing fantasy football this year.
If you're playing in a high stakes league, though, I wonder if you're getting that. But I guess it's one thing to know it. It's another thing to draft by it too. I think that's the other thing. Okay. A couple of receivers in this. Let's quickly hit these guys. You mentioned DJ Moore. What about Jalen Waddle? Are you in on Jalen Waddle?
So what's the best case scenario for Jalen Waddle? That Tyreek Hill gets hurt and then Jalen Waddle becomes a 1,400-yard guy? That's possible. Again, Tyreek Hill's been wearing a brace the past couple days in practice. He had some weird ankle stuff towards the end of last season. He is getting a little bit older. Theoretically, he won't be the fastest man on the planet for the duration of his career.
Yeah.
Okay, great. But then for Jalen Waddle to be able to reach that fantasy value, he has to actually have a worst-case outcome happen for somebody else. Yep. Whereas guys like DJ Moore can still just do that anyway because they're the most electric player on their team, or Cooper Kupp is the number one option. Yeah, he might get hurt, but he's the number one option for I was going to say St. Louis, for Los Angeles. No, I like what you can like the tournament ones, like the online championships, where that upside scenario also comes at the downside of somebody else. Jalen Waddle becomes far more valuable. But if I'm doing a friends and family league where I'm trying to beat my wife and my 3-year-old and probably still lose them in fantasy football, okay, then I don't want to have Jalen Waddle because I don't feel like there's as much the 8 catches for 60 yards don't really matter as much when we're looking for high upside potential from the other guys.
All right. Stephon Diggs, kind of a lightning rod sort of guy. If you're big on Collins, you probably definitionally have to be a little lower than the pack on Diggs, right?
I think if you're big on Tank Dell at his cost, you have to be lower on Stephon Diggs too. If you're big on chemistry, you have to be low on Stephon Diggs as well. And, Nick and I have done this conversation a million times. Nick is probably forgotten more about basketball than I remember currently. But I always think of like when you bring in the super teams, Damian Lillard joins Giannis. Okay, the Bucks team is going to be awesome. Well, no, because it takes time. Steve Nash, Dwight Howard, join Kobe Bryant. Well, the Lakers are going to be great. No, it doesn't work that way. And when you already have a Nico Collins and Tank Dell relationship, how does Stephon Diggs just immediately become a guy that's going to be 100 catches and 1,200 yards? He might not have lost a step. That doesn't matter to me in the equation. It's the chemistry angle that gets me really concerned. And I'm fading him out of almost everyone in that tier.
All right. Very good. It's interesting. I am not fading Waddle, but I'm not targeting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair.
I am taking DJ Moore. I am targeting DJ Moore. Neighbors, I have a couple of. DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman. Early in the season, you were not in on them. You are now.
Because Josh Jacobs and Pacheco have been pushed up a little bit higher, so I don't have to make the decision over those two. If it's Jacobs, Pacheco, or those two receivers, fine. Then I'm taking the running backs every time, feeling great about what I can do. But right now, if it's mid-second round for Pacheco, which I've seen in a number of places, or late second round, early third round for Josh Jacobs, then you're having the Michael Pittmans of the world, Metcalfs fall down. And I think I'm in on Anthony Richardson. I understand that he looked good in one Broncos practice, and therefore we all don't like him. I understand that Michael Pittman doesn't carry a lot of he's going to go for 1,500 yards, lead the league in passing yards. That's not going to be there. He's a good red zone guy. He's a good guy for any other offensive situation and can capably get you 90 catches.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you want in a third round pick. Like if you were the guy that won Devon Achane, it's not me, but you did do the Devon Achane thing. You're either going all the way on the boom guys and then just going to bust immediately. I should probably rephrase that. There's some editing that needs to happen. Or you're going to go after Michael Pittman in round 3 to give you some safety net if and when those guys that you like a lot that are a bit more controversial can't produce on a week-to-week basis. So the Pittman fits there. And I think Metcalf is like the 0.05 version of that where he has a bit more opportunity to go insane, but there still is that floor of late third round receiver that will be very productive for you no matter what.
Yeah. Pittman, to me, I have some volume concerns. In part because they added yet another receiver and Adonai Mitchell. And then Richardson's back, and I think he's going to pull the ball down sometimes a little bit more often. And I think that and Taylor, you get a full season of Taylor. Yep. We didn't have that last year either. I think there's a lot of factors there that might cut down a little bit on Pittman's volume. He's going at that 2-3 turn, and I like a lot of these other receivers. I like DJ Moore better. I like Metcalf better. I like a few others better too. So that's kind of what I'm looking at there.
Yeah, that's fair. And when I'm saying I like Metcalf and Pittman, it's that 3-4 turn of receivers, which I have seen them at too. And if you're pushing up the running backs a little bit, if a Kelsey or Laporta slips into the equation early on, that's where you get that to fall. And previously that wasn't the case. In all the underdog best balls, you weren't ever getting a Metcalf or a Pittman to fall into the 4th round, but you're seeing it just a little bit more at this point.
Fair enough. Fantasy Sports Knockout, where a fantasy league meets a knockout pool, an innovative take on fantasy football. The concept is simple. Choose a new fantasy lineup each week and score points the same way you would in any fantasy league. But you must choose your players wisely. You can only use each player one time. The lowest weekly score, or group of scores, is eliminated from the contest every week. The concept may be simple, but survival is not. How will you play? Load up early or play the matchups and save the better players for later? Fantasy Sports Knockout. Can you survive the fantasy? Sign up at play.fantasysportsknockout.com today. Talking receivers here with Joe Bartel, live from Circa and Radio Row here, and we're moving on to that next tier. Joe, you're like kind of throwing down the claim here. You're saying one of George Pickens, Zay Flower, or Tank Dell is going to be drafted 2 rounds earlier next year.
I think so. And it's a little bit safe to say, hey, 3 really talented receivers who are theoretically alphas on their team will expand on that and make good on that promise and then become guys who are drafting in that DJ Moore range. Not quite the Marvin Harrison range, right? Like the early 2nd round, but I think they could rise to that level. I'm not positive quite who it is. And I think if you did a poll of people who know the fantasy industry and know how this goes, if you said which of George Pickens, Zay Flowers, and Tank Dell would be the highest drafted players next year, I assume the answer will be George Pickens. Maybe I'm wrong with that, especially if it's Russell Wilson under center early on. The deep ball specialist aspect, he still can do a moon ball. I think Pickens is going to thrive in that regard. But even if it's Justin Fields, for example, I mean, Fields made DJ Moore still be fantasy relevant last season, and I think Pickens is the only show in town. And you can play out further. Zay Flowers, he's more of a PPR specialist. He's probably closer to your Marquise Brown from like 3 years ago where he got 100 catches for just over 1,000 yards. I could see that happening for Zay Flowers. And for Tank Dell, it's like, hey, I mean, if the Texans offense works the way you want it to, if everyone who's in on Stroud, and rightfully so, is expecting this boom, then Tank Dell might get 65 catches, but it could go for like 1,250 yards. And if that's the case, Stephon Diggs not back next year, then Tank Dell.
You just hit the big factor there. Why the answer is Tank Dell. It's because Diggs isn't going to be there next year. 1-year deal, restructured his deal. I mean, he might resign. I don't think he's going to, though. I think Flowers is also the answer here, too. I think year 2 with him.
Interesting. So you didn't even pick. I said Pickens, and you're going literally the other 2 guys not picked.
I am.
Isn't it fascinating though?
Yeah, but that's why we play, right? That's also why I'm typically lower than everybody else in the roundtable rankings on George Pickens. 2 words: Arthur and Smith. That's why I'm a little lower on all that.
Fair.
And I don't buy in Russell Wilson either. There. Next year, we're talking Rashee Rice, Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin. Alan Seslowski didn't know F1 meant Formula One, McLaren. Now he knows. I'm throwing everybody under the bus on this podcast, including myself for not hooking up the mic properly in the first place there. But thump, 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 thump. All right. These guys, Jaden Reed, Chris Godwin. Who do you like in that group?
Can I say everyone? Is that cheating? Because I do.
Yeah, you got to pick one. You're drafting. You're on the clock. Which one are you
Christian
taking?
Kirk, Rashee Rice, Terry McLaurin, Jaden Reed, Chris Godwin.
This is your outline, by the way.
I know, but I'm giving you the answer. Is I will defer to everyone. If I could get two of those people in my tier, I'm going to love my roster build more than any other one. And it's possible in ESPN specifically, where Rice sometimes is a 7th round guy, and you can see Jaden Reed is a 9th round guy. It's like, that's crazy to get those types of boom bust on players. Rashee Rice right now is the one I've been targeting the most, but if you're going off of NFFC ADP, he's the highest riser because it seems like he's not going to be suspended this year.
Right.
Makes total sense. So I almost have to throw him out of the equation. Of that group, I think it's going to be Chris Godwin. And I don't know which podcast I was listening to. It could be my favorite friend, Jim Coventry, who was talking about what Chris Godwin could do now in this Rams-like offense. And that becomes the Cooper Kupp comparison where, hey, it's Chris Godwin now back in the slot after 2 years of not being in there, being a guaranteed 1,000-yard receiver already, even in a worse position. Maybe Baker Mayfield lowers that, but Chris Godwin, I think, is super unheralded. Is kind of one of those boring picks, but 80 catches, 1,100 yards, 5 touchdowns. You're talking about a 6th round, 5th round receiver that can do that. That's really, really enticing to me.
Yeah, it is. God loves his children all the same. You're not allowed to love all those wide receivers the same, though. You had to make a pick. That's the rule. You're on the clock. You got to make the pick. That's the way it works here. Next tier guy, Xavier Worthy, Jordan Addison, Ladd McConkey, Calvin Ridley. What stands out to you?
Yeah, and Uncle Ted, who is always in our chats with Jake Latarski, has talked about how he's going to go after all these receivers. He also loved Roshan Johnson last year, which I will tease him to at no end about. I want none of them. So it's going the reverse, Jim. Sorry, Jim. Well, Jeff. You could be Jim for today, too.
Okay, Fred.
No, I want nothing to do with the Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkeys of the world. I just don't. That's the concern that you're displaying for Marvin Harrison that I think is tenfold right now for any of those rookie receivers. It's genuinely round 7 and later. I want nothing to do with those receivers, and it's why I'm going heavy early on. If you're forcing me to pick one,
I'm forcing you,
which is fine. I think I'm going to go Brian Thomas Jr. because the possibility of what he looks like in Jacksonville's offense, if it's Doug Peterson calling plays, that matters to me a lot more as opposed to Press Taylor, which we still don't know, by the way, and that's frustrating. But yes. I think the Kelvin Johnson metric numbers, it's hard to ignore that. Even if it hasn't played out on the football field, it's hard to ignore that.
I love Brian Thomas Jr. That's your best answer so far in this entire podcast. Nailed it. Good job there. We're giving just hot advice here. I like that. Below that, lottery tickets. Who do you love? Who's like okay, I've got my steady players.
Yep.
You got to find somebody, though, that you're going to be able to use like in bye weeks, or maybe you're just hoping that when bye weeks come, this guy is going to climb the ladder and be someone you can use. Are you going steady Eddie? Or are you just swinging for the fences with the rookie?
I don't know if you can swing for the fences with this receiver group outside round 12. I think there's a lot of like boring steady Eddies that maybe you're expecting some projection. If you're letting me cheat, Romeo Dobbs is interesting around 10, but I don't really feel like that qualifies to answer your question. Sam Laporta last year was like my guy. That was a $1 round 16 through 18 player who I was happy to have as my tight end 1, not thinking he would do what he did last year, but that was my guy. I'm going to end up having a similar roster rate across my 22 redraft leagues with Rashad Bateman. I don't know if Rashad Bateman's anything more than a 700-yard receiver, but damned if I'm not going to find out for the 4th year in a row, because I've been all in on Rashad Bateman every single time. And theoretically, this is the first off season that he's been healthy, hasn't dealt with that foot issue. I think Zay Flowers is fine, but there is room for a third pass catcher with Mark Andrews included in that. I don't believe you're going to see anything out of Nelson Aguilar. Maybe Dontez Walker, they took in the 4th round, could do something, but I think he's more of a speed threat than anything else. Rashad Bateman is poised to be in a spot, especially with Todd Monk in year 2, where he can be a capable pass catcher.
Angelo in the chat says he's gone Darnell Mooney, stock up with Rondale Moore out for the season. What say you?
Yeah, I don't think Darnell Mooney's all that good. That's the problem.
That's a problem.
Right, but is there any of those receivers that you're like, oh, yeah, they're really good receivers? No, that's why you're taking round 12 and later. The situation makes sense. I love Kirk Cousins this year. I like Kyle Pitts. I'm all in on Drake London. If it's an ipso facto, then I probably should like Darnell Mooney as well, too. And the Rondale Moore injury, making sure that Mooney's on the field the whole time is great. he does have the potential, and I think it's like that's the ceiling of 1,000 yards. But you could see how that would work if Cousins stays healthy and the passing attack is as electric as people are expecting it to be.
You may have or may not heard this already, but I'm all in on Dontavian Wicks. And he's about 11, 12 turn, according to the NFFC ADP. Give me parts of this Packers offense. I am a buyer. I'm a believer.
Yeah, the cheapest one of that too, because Christian Watson goes earlier, Dobbs goes earlier, and Jaden Reed is the most expensive. You need one of them to go out. Well, I love UW. We're based in Madison, Wisconsin. Their health system is great. Theoretically, they have fixed Christian Watson's hamstrings, but let's just say they don't. And Christian Watson, for the 15th time in his young career at this point, is down with a soft tissue injury for an extended period. Dontavian Wicks fits, and you saw that touchdown catch against the Cowboys in that postseason game. He was awesome. So I'm all in with the idea of getting Dontavian Wicks as like a wide receiver 6, right? That's more or less where you'd be getting him if you're drafting at that range.
We're going to close with Jahan Dotson getting traded to the Eagles. Your reaction, sir, and does that make you more likely to draft him? And are you more interested in any of the other secondary, tertiary receiving options on the Commanders?
Yeah, so no to the second one. That's very clear. In fact, actually, I've been in on Terry McLaurin a lot, and it makes me feel even better about the shares because I think Jaden Daniels will really only have an opportunity to hit one guy, maybe Ben Sinnott by like week 6 when the Commanders take their heads out of their butts and figure out they need to get him on the field more. But I don't really want any other pass catcher, Luke McCaffrey, whatever. None of those guys interest me. The Eagles have been desperate to get a wide receiver 3. You know, they had Ome Zacasis. They had the Julio Jones carcass. They've went through all those retreads. The idea of buying low on a first-round receiver who showed promise in his rookie year is fine. I like that concept. I thought they paid a pretty high price to do so. But it also is telling to me that a division team is happy to trade that player into the division. That's a really big gamble. And I know it's the Commanders who've done dumb things for a long time, but that would make me very nervous. I did not like Jahan Dotson coming out of college, and I thought the 8 touchdowns, whatever he had in his rookie year, was kind of an aberration. It sort of covered a lot of faults that he had, and people could blame Sam Howell or Eric Bieniemy in that offense, and I just don't think Jahan Dotson's that good. But
and now he's got to learn a new offense too, as the number 3.
In 2 weeks, right? Yeah, it's challenging, I think.
Yeah, I'm less inclined to click on him, to be honest, than I was before.
Less inclined, okay.
Yeah, as I just don't think the Eagles are going to use their third receiver all that often.
Answer is what's less than 0, because I was already not clicking on
there
Jahan
you go. Yeah. Some people were. I don't have much of them, but he's going to play the slot or something like that. No, I don't think so. I'd go Goddard before him any day. Just go that route if I wanted a third receiving option. All right. There are a billion wide receivers, just like there are a billion stars in the universe. We can't cover all of them there. We are going to conclude at this point. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, live here from Radio Row at Circa Sports. Coming up next, we're going to be talking tight ends. We got Nick Whalen, Jim Coventry coming at you. If you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, rate, and review us. Hit rotowire.com/try. Patronize our sponsors. You know that good stuff. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Great comments in the stream. Stay tuned. We got the fantasy football tight end preview coming up next.